The plenary speaker for the session is Dr. Nawal Kishor Sharma. I humbly request plenary speaker to come up on the stage. Thank you, sir. The topic for this plenary talk is Homage in Dialogue, Keki Daruwalla's poems on poets and painters. Before we go ahead with proceedings, let me introduce this plenary speaker in brief. Dr. Nawal Kishor Sharma has been working as an assistant professor at Department of English, Krantiguru Shyamji Krishna Verma Kutch University, Bhuj, Gujarat since 2010. Prior to that, he worked on the editorial desk of Hindustan Times, Bhopal for nearly 7 years. His areas of interest include modern poetry, translation, comparative literature, and history of Western art. He has translated the first Hindi novel, Pariksha Guru, 1882, into English for his PhD under the guidance of eminent academician Professor Avdesh Kumar Singh. His poems were published in Visual Verse, an international anthology of ekphrastic poetry. He has recently completed his first novel and plans to publish it soon. I'd like to call upon the chairperson, Professor R.B. Zara, to felicitate Dr. Nawal Kishore Sharma with a shawl to express our gratitude. Now, I would like to request our plenary speaker to address us now.
Thank you so much for the introduction. As you all know, I will be talking about Keki and Daruwalla and how he has responded to some poets and painters. So that is the canvas, it's quite huge. I do not know how much I will be able to cover. Now, Mehta sir was talking about, Jala sir was also talking about how we once upon a time perceived Indian English poetry. There's a short poem by Eunice D'Souza called My Students. And in that poem, she says, my students think it funny that Daruwallas and D'Souzas should write poetry. Poetry is fairyland's forlorn, so for them poetry means Keats or romantics. Women writers Miss Austen, so novelists means Austen. And so far as erotic literature is concerned, only men can write erotic literature. Therefore, she says, only foreign men air their crotches. So I thought that this would be very relevant to quote this short poem called My Students. So today we have come a long way, so nobody will say that Daruwallas cannot be poets. Now, I had the good fortune of meeting Keki and Daruwalla ji once when I was working with Hindustan Times at Bhopal. And there is a multi-arts complex there called Bharat Bhavan. And in Bharat Bhavan they had organized a program called Kavi Bharati, where poets from different languages had come to participate. And I just went there because Keki Daruwalla ji was coming. And in that gathering, I remember he had read some poems from Mapmaker and new poems. What I particularly remember and like to tell you all here is the fact that he said that often youngsters approach him with their poems for his comments. And he said that whenever somebody comes, I tell all of them one simple thing, that if you are learning Kathak or if you are practicing music, then you do lot of practice before making a performance. And therefore, when you write poetry, you should apply the same, principle. Because poetry is also an art form which requires the same kind of rigorous riyaz which music or Kathak or any other art form requires. So even if somebody offers gajar ka halwa to his guest, I think he has tried the recipe so many times, before he offers gajar ka halwa to the guests. So the same thing applies to poets also. Now, before I dive into my topic, I will like to say a couple of things, because this talk is oriented towards students. So just 5 minutes it will take. You see, if you want to read Keki and Daruwalla in his totality, then you have the complete poems, selected poems, which covers poems from 1970 to 2005. And then you have Naishapur and Babylon. This continues from 2005 to 2017. And then you have one more volume which is about the history of Parsis, called The Fire and Altar Poems. And his last collection is this Landfall, the slimmest one. Now, because his first volume was published in 1970 and Landfalls was published in 2023, therefore his poetic career expands over half a century, 5 decades. And when I am approaching a poet whose output is so much, I always adopt a strategy. So that strategy I want to share with you. But the purpose is not to, pigeonhole his poetic talent or to put him into a bracket, but to make him manageable, accessible, approachable. So right from 1970 onwards, because first volume was Under Orion, followed by Apparitions in April, and then Winter Poems. And Keki and Daruwalla, in many of his interviews, disowned those collections, saying that they are about curfews and communal tension and floods and famine. So in one of the interviews he says that this is something that a journalist should do, a poet should do something better. Now, apart from these three, how do you make Keki and Daruwalla a bit manageable? Because there are so many different themes. Okay. So my strategy is to group his poems under a category, classify all his poems under. So there are some categories which I have made. So that I just want to share with you. But that does not mean that it is exhaustive or all-encompassing. No. One, Keki and Daruwalla. Say for instance, you do not know, because there are two Daruwallas, just as there are two Nisimizikels and two Jayanta Mahapatras. One whom you find in anthologies. So there is an anthology Daruwalla. And because most of the anthologies, let us say, if you take into account Salim Piradina or A.K. Mehrotra or Art Parthasarathy or anybody else, you see, you will find poems like Ghagra and Spate, or some poems taken from, let us say, Keeper of the Dead, but not his latest poems. So, as a result, what happens is the real Daruwalla we never get to know, just as we never get to know the real Nissim Ezekiel. And we keep reading, poems like Night of the Scorpion and other stuff. Okay. So, Keki and Daruwalla basically is a poet of dramatic monologues. Yeah. So, dramatic monologues, the speaker can be a historical figure or figures, like we the Kauravas is a dramatic monologue being spoken by all of them collectively. Or maybe the speaker can be Ashoka, the king's talks to the scribe, or it can be a professor of Hebrew, or it can be a student of research student at Ghana, or it can be a comet called Kohutek. So the speakers can be anybody. They can belong to history or legend. They can belong to the contemporary, world. They can be a bird, or they can be a comet or a meteor or something like that. Then related to that, you see, there are poems wherein he talks about a famous, legendary, iconic figure. Say Mahatma Gandhi. He has written 2 poems on Mahatma Gandhi. Say Martin Luther. Say Charvak. And third, poems about imaginary characters. Evangelica Eva, Maulvi Sahib, okay, the revolutionary. So these are, and there are many. Guzman's son, magician's son, okay. Map maker, of course, map maker is a monologue, okay, or glass blower, okay. So this is one way of reading, simplifying Keki and Daruwalla. 2, he is a poet of myths and history. So he has written poems like The Fall of Mohenjo-daro. To give you very obvious examples, a poem called History, a poem called The Middle Ages. And so far as myths are concerned, 3 poems from the Mahabharata: Charvak, which he has taken from Shantikal, and Draupadi, short poem, and of course We the Kauravas. So 3 poems from. Then of course from Greek myths, say Persephone and Orpheus and Tiresias, and there are, and this entire collection is about history and myths. Another way of reading him is to read him as a poet of journeys, pilgrimage to Badrinath, crossing Chorhoti, okay, what lights up, the first poem in the Naishapur volume. So poems about journeys, symbolic or otherwise. Then you have poems about rivers. So boat ride along the Ganga, Ghagra and Spate, very predictable. River Silt, okay, or Crossing the Rivers, that is the name of the collection. And then you have poems about birds and beasts. So wolf, which is often erroneously compared with Tejude's, it has nothing to do with that actually. Yeah. So wolf, or The Last Howl, companion pieces, The Last Wail, hawk, Requiem for the Hawk, fish, Sparing Fish by Night, okay. That is not the exact title, but then something like that. So, and then bird poems, Bird Eclipse, and then there's a poem, beautiful poem called Barbet in this, cranes, okay. So, mostly when he writes poems about animals, they are about predatory animals, and then birds, of course. Okay. So this is one. Because when I am going to talk about his poetry on painters, that is another classification, another category, you see. So then you have poems. It's often said that he's a poet of landscapes. I don't find it very intelligent. I mean, what is that? I really don't know what is. Everybody is a poet of landscape. So yeah. So far as that is concerned, you have a long poem called Mandva. Okay. And there are many more. I am not able to recall. Apart from this, because if you just flip through these collections, you will find that he is a poet of long narrative poems. Short poems you will hardly find. If you find imagistic poems, very good images you will find, but in long poems. I will just quote one. Okay. You will hardly find him writing a 2-line poem. I found one in his first volume. This is a 2-line poem. It's called A Simple Poet. 3 lines, sorry. He writes so simply, damn on him, that learned men are hard put to understand him. This is the shortest poem I found in Daruwalla, shortest. And slightly longer is, in the same volume, very funny poem called The Wrong Match. It's about a matrimonial match. It goes like this. This was a queer wedding. Livingstone matched with Korah. The woman was from Lesbos, the husband from Gomorrah. So this is a streak, that you don't find in Daruwalla often enough. So these are, and then it is often said that he does not, his body of work is slightly, it lacks love poetry. But then he has written love poems. For instance, Earnest of Desire, or Love in Meerut, okay, or Love Among the Pines, or The Night of the Jackals. These are love poems. And in my PPT, maybe if time permits, I will read the last. Last one is a poem which was inspired by the Pankha Museum, created by Jatin Das. Okay, in Kyonjar, I think, or Mayurbhanj, one of these two.
It's also the
Bhubaneswar, yeah, Bhubaneswar. Sorry, yeah. So okay, but then yeah, he has written, but of course he has not written conventional love poems, but there are very tender poems about his mother, his wife, called Sentinel and something, I forgot. And then there are poems on For My Dear Daughter Rugzain, For My Dear Daughter Anahita, For My Dear Granddaughter. So this is how you can classify and read. But that doesn't mean that it will include everything. But nevertheless, Daruwalla, who at first sight seems a little formidable, becomes manageable. And then of course this category which I have picked up for my presentation. Okay, now after this, before I move on to how he engages with and responds to international poets, and the reason why I picked up this topic was tomorrow is World Poetry Day, 21st of March. So that was one more reason which was the motivating factor. Anyways, and painters I just added because I am interested in painting. Anyways, so and I found him responding to so many of them. So first of all, before I discuss how he responds to international poets, not English poets, not American poets, Russian poets, Palestinian poets, I would like to tell you something about what he feels about Indian poets. Because he has not written a poem on Indian poetry scene as such. But there is a poem wherein you find, I don't have Apparitions in April because that volume is not available online anywhere I checked. So you see, when you Sir was talking about Nissim Ezekiel, and Mehta sir was also talking about Nissim Ezekiel and others. You see, Nissim Ezekiel, Jayant Mahapatra, A.K. Ramanujan, Daruwalla, they are pivotal foundational figures in Indian English poetry. And all of them have a kind of critical disdain, let us say, okay, towards the 19th century poets. And this we find in all of them, okay. So, if you read A.K. Mehrotra's anthology, he is very hard hitting, okay, and very uncharitable. He says that good that Sarojini Naidu stopped writing after 1917. It was a good judgment on her, part. And in the same breath, he says that Aurobindo has written a worthless epic. I think I am quoting him correctly. A worthless epic of 24,000 lines. Okay. Now, a bit harsh, but no problem. So, why is it that these, because Sir mentioned a time to change, so it's not for nothing that, Nissim Ezekiel calls his first collection a time to change. So, there is a kind of urge to evolve a new idiom, to deviate from this, conventional poetry that was being written by Daruwalla and others. And I think because they hate 19th century poets, because I think they are too correct. By correct, I mean they are too traditional, too predictable, too derivative. And I am quoting out of context, but I found it very insightful. There's this poem, I told you, Night of the Jackals. It's a love poem, okay? And he's very fond of writing sequence poems, having 10, sections. So, this woman and this man, they are talking. And this woman says something which applies to all post-independence Indian English poets, I think. In the 6th section, she says, when the semal tree flowers with embers, that is the time the cough gets me. It's the flower dust, I think. Pollen, I corrected. So the man corrects her, saying it's not flower dust, it's pollen, I corrected her. And read dismay in her eyes. She was not very happy with this. So she says, how will you ever write, my love? Poetry is written with the wrong words, don't you know? So whether it is Keki Daruwalla, or whether it is Jayant Mahapatra, or whether it is Nissim Ezekiel, or whether it is Jeet Tai, they are all writing poetry with wrong words. And this is how I think, they matter a lot, because they are not so correct. Okay. So, I was talking about this critical disdain which you find in A.K. Mehrotra and Nissim Ezekiel, and some are very vocal and articulate about it, some are not so vocal and articulate about it. So I will like to quote a few lines from this poem called To Fellow Indian Poets. Okay, so before I move on to international poets, let us see what he has to say about fellow Indian poets. And he says here that, whenever there is a symposium, whenever there is a discussion, everybody is discussing either Torudutt or Sarojini Naidu, and the contemporary voices are ignored. And that is what is very painful to him. So he says, they are still in the shadow of the casuarina tree. And when the coffee house deigns to discuss you, they start with Torudutt stressing her Frenchiness. You need something foreign about you. Else, verse cannot sprout from our cow dung soil. And then Sarojini, in the stance heroic of her ballads, now mock heroic. And then to Aurobindo, reposing in nirvana. His works transcending the law of karma, beyond the cycle of rebirth and reprint. And then you see them taking off their shoes, socks, lose their stink in the incense vapors. They cover their heads those who don't have caps, with clean white handkerchiefs, and with gong and cymbal, eyes closed in fervor, the debate enters Gitanjali. I don't have a hanky and hence do not enter. As it is, the concierge might have thrown me out. By the time they reach you, they are short of wind. Don't worry, brother bastards, your sons will mention you on your gravestones. So this is what he has to say about fellow Indian poets. Now there is one more poem. Now this is a poem about those who are writing in English or discussing Indian English poetry in gatherings. And there is another poem which was published in New Poems, this collection. It's called Invocation. And this invocation is in the form of a prayer. And he is invoking those Bhasha poets versus Anglophone poets, that's the conflict. So he is invoking those Bhasha poets because they think that they are the gatekeepers or custodians of Indian culture. And they have a right to, because they are rooted in Indian tradition. So invocation. And he is very tongue-in-cheek here because we Hindiwalas write in Devanagari. So he invents a demonic counterpart, calling it Asur Nagari. I don't know how to read it, Asur Nagari or Nagari, but I think it should be Nagari. So the first stanza goes like this: we who write in Asur Nagari, in the land of the Devas, we who write in the Asura script, in the land of the Devas, we who parrot a language that came across the black waters and scrambled our caste, so that no one can help us, not even the Devas, where shall we go from here? And he goes on. And then just one or two more lines. He says, you who live in the nest woven by the south winds, you whose name is warbled by birds and scintillating wings in sandalwood groves, hear us, literary Pope, we await your encyclicals. And goes on. Okay. So this is a poet about, not exactly about Indian English poets, but poets who think that their voices have, greater authenticity compared to those who are writing. And this is something which Keki and Daruwalla always complain. I overheard him at Bharat Bhavan, he was saying, "Hamari kavita ko to koi sunta hi nahi." Because when he was reading, nobody clapped because nobody understood. And there was no wawa. So the way you respond to English poetry and the way you respond to Hindi poetry or Urdu poetry, there's a difference. And there are no galebas poets in English. Nobody sings. So you need a very different aesthetics of judgment. And there is another poem wherein he writes about those who tend to exoticize India for the consumption of the West or the Orientalists, and those who take, those whose writings focus mainly on the abject, those who showcase the filth and dirt of the country so that they can pander to the Western audience. So to writers abroad, just, you wish to write on India, sir? This way, please. Let us trail the alley, cat down the drain, choked with ash and eggshells. Have a care, the scum and the slime may soil your shoes. Would you care to photograph those urchins lost in their laughter? You would prefer, I think, a hangdog look, assertive ribcage and mouth caked with snot and grime. The choice is wide, the space-clad sadhu, the lunatic in Hisian, or the beggar with the running sword. It sure feels good, sir, discussing pus pockets with disinfected pen on sterilized paper. This is, very hard hitting, very hard hitting. So this is what he says about Indian poets writing in English. And before we move on to the international poets, let me tell you one more thing, that he has written a poem on Indian English that's called The Mistress. I teach Mistress in my class. So Mistress, in this poem, it's an allegory where he's imagining English language Indian English as a mistress. So mistress being a woman who is both very powerful and very attractive. But then because she is very attractive and powerful, therefore she can ditch you or betray you any moment. So Indian English is the mistress. So the subtext, of course he doesn't say that in so many words, the subtext is you need not fear her at all if you make her your legally wedded wife, which Indian poets have not done so far. And that's why, the mistress, wonderful poem. And the reason why he is writing this poem, because we are discussing three poets. Jayant Mahapatra, so far as my knowledge is limited understanding is concerned, I have not come across any poem where he is talking about language, as such. But Nizam Ezekiel, yes, very Indian poets, very Indian poems in Indian English. I think this happens because of deep-seated colonial guilt or post-colonial regret. That is why you think that you are probably betraying your mother tongue or your culture or whatever. So you feel like justifying yourself. So there are four approaches rather. Okay, one, our Parthasarthi's approach, whoring after English gods. Okay, so he says that my teeth, my tongue, my palate, they are foreign to the agglutinative touch of Tamil, because I have lived so many years in America or England, whatever. America, yeah. So this is one approach towards language. Two, Kamala Das, let me write in English. Okay, why do you bother me? Okay, do whatever you please. This is another approach. Third approach, you treat Indian English as mistress, but she can betray any moment. She is not your wife. Make her your wife, then you will be happy. Then she will not betray you. Yeah. And fourth approach, this is Ezekiel, making fun of how Indians speak. There are four approaches, which we find in these early Indian poets. Okay, so now we move on to the poets whom the international poets. There is no text, only visuals, but I thought that many students probably are not familiar with these poets, and therefore I thought that if you can see the faces, and then you will be able to, I think, retain these ideas in your mind more easily. So this gentleman is Osip Mandelstam. Okay, his dates are, if you want his dates are 1891 to 1938. Okay, and she is his wife Nadezhda Mandelstam. And Stocking Mandelstam is a sequence of poems which Keki Daruwalla has written on Osip Mandelstam's poetry, and this entire sequence appeared in A Summer of Tigers. Okay, and here he has written around 10 poems on Mandelstam. Now Mandelstam was a Russian poet belonging to what you call Silver Age in Russian poetry, and he represents what you call acmeism in Russian poetry. Acme means pinnacle, height, sublime height. So these poets, he and his contemporaries. Who are his contemporaries? Contemporaries like Anna Akhmatova, then Marina Tsvetaeva, then Boris Pasternak, and Nikolai Gumilev, and others. Okay, and they are called acmeists because they rejected the tenets of symbolism, because symbolism makes poetry very vague. and therefore they aspire to make poetry very concrete, and therefore they are often compared with the Anglo-American imagists. So, Osip Mandelstam, he incurred the wrath of Joseph Stalin, the great Soviet dictator who succeeded Lenin. And what he did was, he wrote a poem, a 16-line poem called Stalin Epigram. And this 16-line poem has been beautifully translated by Clarence Brown and W.S. Merwin. And Keki and Daruwalla has also mentioned these two names. And he said that I got inspiration to write these poems from this book, this translation. So what he has done is, he has also translated the same text which was earlier translated by W.S. Merwin, called Stalin Epigram. And it's a 16-line poem, easily available online in multiple translations. And he did not know, or probably he knew, that he was courting his own ruin by antagonizing a dictator like Joseph Stalin. So he writes this poem in 1933. And what he does in this poem is, it is said, because nothing is known for sure, it is said that he never wrote this poem. He read out this poem, recited this poem in front of a select few friends of his in his house. But some of them might have asked him to recite it 2-3 times, and thus they memorized it. And they reported him to Stalin. And that is how he incurred the wrath of, the great Soviet dictator. So this poem was written in 1933, called Stalin Epigram. What he does here is, he lampoons Stalin as a leader, political leader. He says, he calls him a murderer and a peasant slayer, one. He denounces him for having sycophants around him, okay, who kept on fawning on him. And not only that, he makes fun of his appearance also. He says that he has got worm-like fingers, thick worm-like fingers, and he says that he has cockroach-like moustache. Elsewhere he says he had walrus moustache, which is, I think, more accurate. Yeah, and then he says that in our country, where he has spread a reign of terror, only he can point a finger. Nobody else can do anything. So he also talks about the fear psychosis he has created in the Soviet Russia of his time. So you have all heard of Stalinist purges, when he picked up all the dissenting voices and either exiled them or jailed them or eliminated them, like this. So there are a couple of poems. No, it's okay. Thank you, sir. 322. Stalin Epigram, I will, instead of reading Merwin's translation, I will read Daruwalla's translation, the Stalin Epigram. And then I will read a poem which he has written on this poem. How risky it was and how dangerous it was to attempt something like this. So the Stalin Epigram. The land speaks to us and we cannot hear, because people whisper. They are in mortal fear of Stalin. Unheard from 10 paces, words disappear. The one we hear about is the Kremlin mountaineer, that is of course Stalin. The assassin and peasant slayer. His 10 fingers are thick, grub, fat, great. His words are iron measures of dead weight. Roaches laugh on his upper lip and face. The gleam on his boot tops cannot be effaced. Half men, because those men who are not masculine enough, those psychopaths, half men are mirrored in that shining boot rim. Chicken-necked genuflectors who have surrounded him. One caws, another mews, one scrapes like a broom. He points his forefinger as he prates and booms. The anvil is littered with his horseshoes and decrees, one each for the eyes, groin, forehead and the knees. Like berries he rolls, executions on his tongue. He could hug his victims like old friends from home. He could hug his victims because he mostly hanged his friends as dissenting voices. Now, this poem, when he read out this poem in front of Boris Pasternak, he said that you have written your own death sentence. And because he knew Bukharin, Nikolai Bukharin, and that's why he was not killed, because Bukharin for a very long time he was, acted as an intermediary between, ever so silently, but between Stalin and Mandelstam. So there's a poem which is about this epigram. It goes like this. The poem he is saying has been lying dormant inside you, and such poems are lying dormant inside many of us, but then they keep waiting for the appropriate time to come out. And when they come out, you quote your own ruin in the process. So this is called the poem, and here you have the Stalin epigram, the poem. It has slept that long, this embryo, for half an eternity, and suddenly it can wait no longer, now it is outward bound. Precipitous in its longing, looking for a soul, a body through which to find utterance. There are blood poems that take you to the knife, which make an activist out of you, and death poems that give you a vulture's eye view of what the vulture sees. And there is a third category to which this poem belongs, and poems that mark themselves out for a particular locale, grey wall behind you and guns in front. Such poems descend perilously on the imperiled. The poem on Stalin was such a poem. So this is a poem on this Stalin epigram. And then there are 6 or 7 poems. I will read only some passages from 2 of them. The context is the Cheka, or the secret police. They have come to arrest him. And when Nadezhda opens the door, she thinks that probably they have come because he slapped a literary figure called Alexei Tolstoy because of some rift he had with him, because quote unquote he insulted his wife. So she thinks that probably the secret police have come to arrest him, but she is relieved. She thinks that if this happens, then at least he would not be killed. It would lead to maybe a few days exile. Okay. So these are poems on, now stalking Mandelstam. This title can be read in 2 ways. One way is how the secret police stalked, pursued, chased Mandelstam, and now after so many years, Mandelstam is probably trailing or pursuing Keki Daruwalla, stalking Mandelstam. Yeah. Okay. So they walk in. They have come to arrest him. They walk in. The night warrants, as they are called. The night warrants, as they are called. Their fingers run expertly over Osip's hips to see if he carries a gun. Should not they have known that poets don't carry guns? They go through his poems looking for those bullets disguised as words. This fear is lethal, the word turning to lead. You could aim at any forehead, fire from any line resting your muzzle on the sandbag of his stanza. This the checker always knew. The rhyme as cartridge, the poem as musket. So this is one poem, and there's another poem. The sequence is fifth in the sequence. Fear keeps ricocheting now about the unknown, about the question unanswered because no one dare ask it. What are they after? Is this retribution for slapping Alexei Tolstoy in the face? That would be great. It could just lead to exile. Who was afraid of exile? A Jew in St. Petersburg or Moscow was a bit of an exile anyway. So elsewhere, Mandelstam says that Russia is a great country because here poets are taken very seriously, because if they write something which is politically incorrect, then they are jailed or exiled or killed. So Russia cares for her poets and poetry lovers, very tongue-in-cheek. So and because he was a Jew, so he felt probably a little alienated in the society. So who was afraid of exile? A Jew in St. Petersburg or Moscow was a bit of an exile anyway. A poet who stood by his feelings was always an exile in Stalin's Russia. They had not got hold of that other thing, had they? That other thing is that poem, which probably he wrote. Just one copy I found on internet. I found just one copy signed by him. Okay. So they had not got hold of that other thing, had they? Because that could have led to a chat with the firing squad. So these are some of the poems on his arrest. I will not. Now this is a theme which keeps haunting him. That's very important, because all these poems he gives a long footnote to stalking Mandelstam, and these poems are based on this memoir, Hope Against Hope, followed by another memoir called Hope Abundant, and they are considered classics. So these poems were inspired by this Hope Against Hope, and that is why now, why did I say that this theme inspired him, haunted him? Because Nadezhda Mandelstam, because when he wrote this Stalin epigram, what happened was he was exiled, arrested and exiled. First he was sent to Shardin, and then he was sent to Voronezh, which was a very cold country. And after that he tried to commit suicide also at Shardin. And after that he was sent to what they called transit camp or labor camp, but actually it was a concentration camp, where he had, where he was suffering from ill health for a very long time because of sheer neglect. And the day he died, nobody was informed about his death, because 2 days later his inmates informed the authorities that Mandelstam has died because they wanted to have his ration. Okay. And therefore nobody knows when Mandelstam died. And he was buried in a mass grave. So there is no, grave where you can go and pay your homage to Mandelstam. So he was given a mass burial, and nobody knows about the exact date. The place we know, it's called Vladivostok. But now, because of this repression, because of the fear psychosis which Stalinist purges have created in the society, Nadezhda Mandelstam avoided any confrontation with the authorities. So I told you that this is a theme which keeps haunting him, the Daruwalla. So after writing these 8-9 poems in Night of Tigers, he revisits this theme, this time celebrating Nadezhda, okay, in Map Maker. And this is a fantastic poem, and the context is more fantastic than the poem itself. Because Nadezhda, when she sensed that she cannot print and publish his poems, So what she did was, I found it really unbelievable, incredible it is, that she memorized 16,000 lines and carried, you know, so she was a walking, talking, let us say, custodian of his legacy. A real walking, talking archive of Osip Mandelstam's legacy. So, in Mapmaker, he writes a poem called Nadezhda Widow. And the lines which I want to quote here is something which I found very interesting. Now you are the widow of a generation. So widow we associate with, you know, how she keeps the memory of the dead husband alive. So she's keeping the memory of her dead husband alive. She's a walking, talking, you know, archive, cherishing his poetry. Now you are the widow of a generation, the widow of the shadow of the revolution, and since you lived half a century after he disappeared, surely we would call you the widow of time as we know it, of the black taper end of the embering millennium. Okay. Now, please, the next one, sorry. The next poet is, of course, Anna Akhmatova. And Anna Akhmatova, he has written 4 poems to Anna Akhmatova called Some Poems for Akhmatova. And 2 of them are extremely interesting. One, he, in these 5 poems, sorry, not 4, 5. In these 5 poems, he pays his homage to the poet, saying that you are very strong, though you look very delicate and feeble, but you are very strong. And you have got a prophetic vision that you could foresee what will happen, although you were born much before, you know, 1917 when the Bolshevik Revolution happened, or 1914 when the World War took place, First World War took place. You could foresee many things, and which is something which Daruwalla finds amazing. But the poem that I want to talk about is, you see, this is a poem where Daruwalla is actually linking himself with Anna Akhmatova, because both of them have written a similar poem. Okay. Now, in the third poem he says, I have a poem like yours. So this poem is, he is referring to a poem called Lambing, about the birth of a lamb. Okay, lambing. So in this poem, he says that Anna Akhmatova wrote a poem called In Imitation of the Armenians. Okay, In Imitation of the Armenians, where she says, now let me tell you the allegory here, that Anna Akhmatova's son, Lev Gumilev, was imprisoned for 7 years. And she with other women used to wait outside the prison house for the latest news about, so there would be so many nameless, faceless women, okay, waiting outside the prison. Okay. Now she does not know anything about the fate of her son. And she writes a poem which she calls Imitation from the Armenian. And in this poem she says, she actually speaks in the voice of a sheep, a ewe, who has lost her lamb. Because the Padshah, the king, the absolute despotic oriental monarch, has slaughtered the lamb and devoured it. So because she is living in, you know, a repressive regime, she cannot directly confront the dictator or write a poem which will put her in trouble. So she writes this poem, Imitation from the Armenian. I shall come into your dream as black you, approach the throne on withered and infirm legs, bleating. Padshah, have you dined well? You who hold the world like a bread, beloved of Allah, was my little son to your test? Was he fat enough? Now, this is an allegory where she is accusing the Padshah. And the Padshah, the Oriental despot, is none other than Stalin himself. And at the same time, she is invoking Psalm 23 and inverting it. So there is an invocation of Psalm 23 and inversion and invocation, both. Because in Psalm 23, God has been portrayed as a shepherd who is very kind, who feeds the sheep, takes care of them, protects them from danger, from wolf, etc. And the same shepherd has slaughtered the lamb and eaten it up. Okay, so that is the resonance, you see. So Keki and Daruwalla, because he has also written a poem called Lambing, therefore he is saying, I have also written a poem like you. You have done, okay. I have a poem like yours, you talking of the shepherd and his throwing stick and a lamb being roasted for the prodigal son. Then I came upon yours, invitation from the Armenian, but your black you is addressing the Padshah, that was Stalin. That upped the scales. My you was only talking to the shepherd, the Lord. Stalin was a different samovar of tea. Not a cup of tea, but samovar of tea. Altogether, a bigger bowl of goulash. What can the black you ask now that the lamb is cooked? I wondered, yet I started sinking when you said to the walrus moustache, was he testy, my little son? Did he please you, please your children? I sank, there are hearts which keep sinking even after they have hit the sea floor. So this is a very, very interesting poem in this connection, because here you can find, maybe Daruwalla accidentally wrote a poem called Lambing, where the sheep is lamenting the fact that the shepherd has killed and devoured the flesh of the lamb. And later he finds that, Anna Akhmatova has also written a similar poem, and therein these two poets, converge their themes, you see. And the fifth one is related to a long sequence of poems which is called the Requiem. It's a very famous poem, I think running into 17 sections, mimicking the 17 months she waited, probably. So what happened one day while she was waiting outside the jail, like other women who were waiting for their brothers or husbands or fathers or whatever, she saw a woman with blue lips because of bitter cold. And she did not know that Anna Akhmatova was a poet. So she just casually asked her, can you write something on this, the madness which is being enacted in front of our eyes? And Anna Akhmatova says yes. So she agrees to, agrees to the fact that she will bear witness to this. Okay. So Daruwalla says that although that woman might have been erased from the annals of history, but you have made her immortal. So in this beginning of Requiem, she says, I spent 17 months, yeah, I was right, 17 months in the prison queues in Leningrad. One day someone recognized me. Then a woman with lips blue with cold who was standing behind me, and of course had never heard of my name, came out of the numbness which affected us all and whispered in my ear. We all spoke in whispers. This she writes in parentheses. Can you describe this? I said, I can. And that is how Requiem was born, and that is how Daruwalla's poem was born. So just a woman with blue lips standing in the Leningrad cold, bread queue, prison line, woman with a name perhaps without bread, awaiting your turn to see sun lover frozen behind bars as you turn blue under a frosty sky. You are immortal in a way despite the erasure of your name. Your face stares out of her poem, and your question, can you describe this? Hunger and air brittle with cold and fear. And when Akhmatova agrees, we watch the wintry smile trudging across the memory of what once had been your face. So this was Akhmatova. Please, next slide if you can. Thank you very much. Now, these are this gentleman on the right in wearing a cap is Pablo Neruda, of course. I will come to him a little later. And then in the middle you have Mahmoud Darwish, and then of course Faiz in black and white, and then Constantini Cavafy. Okay. So I will first talk about Mahmoud Darwish. Hope you are not getting bored. Okay. So Mahmoud Darwish, he has written a poem on Mahmoud Darwish without mentioning his name. So it took me a while to find out whether it is really about Mahmoud Darwish or not. So in one of his interviews he says, yes, I have written a poem on Mahmoud Darwish, and that was the clue. So then I had no doubt. Because he calls this poem to a Palestinian poet. I don't know why he has made it so vague, to a Palestinian poet. But then the hints and clues which he has given make it very clear that he has written about Mahmoud Darwish. Now Mahmoud Darwish was a Palestinian poet whom Qasim Ganafini, if you have heard of him, called a great resistant poet of Palestine. Qasim Ganafini. Now he lived as an exile in Beirut, in Cairo, in Paris for 26 years. And Keki and Daruwalla, when he is writing this poem, he is using the metaphor of a vineyard. So he says that once the vineyard belonged to you. So the vineyard is, of course, the homeland. And he says, when the vineyard is lost, then the vine is also lost. So the culture of Palestine, that is also lost. And when the wine is lost, then the intoxication is also gone. That is, of course, the kind of satisfaction, the kind of fulfillment which you derive when you are living in your own country, amidst your own people. Okay. And then he says that you have been living on exile for 26 years, and your blood has become exile. So exile is your very identity, and your very chant is exile, your bread is exile. That means your survival is also exile. And there's a wonderful image here. He says, I can see your blood curdle and turn thick as Turkish coffee when you think of exile. You see. And how many? 15? I will only talk about poets. Painters I will not. I knew that it will take a long time. That's why. So he says that you keep blaming nature or God or something, and he uses a beautiful word. And Daruwalla is very fond of this. He has written a poem on two words called manzil and destination. How these two words are different. So he says that you were born east of Acre in Galilee. You were a kid in 1948. In your innocence, you are still a child railing against your destiny, against the pitiless heavens. In Urdu, the sky or falak is always pitiless. Now it's really so. So I just want to quote a couplet from Mir to illustrate the point that falak is, because falak otherwise means horizon, sky. And ufak is horizon, falak is of course sky or mirror also in some contexts. So Mir says, Delhi जो एक शहर था आलम में इंतखाब, रहते थे मुंतखब ही जहाँ रोजगार के, उस फलक को लूट कर वीरान कर, उसको फलक ने लूट कर वीरान कर दिया, हम रहने वाले हैं उसी उजड़े दयार के. So this falak is very important. So what he is doing is he is actually connecting himself with that tradition where falak is destructive. Okay. And very interestingly, he does not conclude this poem by making a plea for aggression or militant nationalism, because he says that both of you are aware of the pain of exile. The Jews have also suffered exile, and you are also suffering exile. So therefore, you can, empathize and commiserate with each other instead of being, So he says, "Let peace descend on you and your neighboring people. They too have had a 2,000-year-old exile. I pray that they never drive your children into the desert, and may your children never drive them into the sea." Now this is probably, the contemporary political rhetoric. Samundar mein phek do. Yeah? So he's probably referring to that. Okay. Now very interestingly, the same page where you have to the Palestinian poet, you have another poem called Yehudi. And why he has called it Yehudi, I do not know. He could have called it Jew also. And the crux of this poem, because we are running short of time, the crux of this poem is, he says that this is wrong to say that somebody who belongs to a minority group understands the pain and anguish of another minority group. You see, so he says that although a Yehudi looks like a Parsi, but it will take us 1,000 exiles to feel the pain of a Yehudi. So we wear the same skull cap and we have same pointed nose, etc. etc. He's actually, the poem begins like this. And then he says that no, despite the fact that we are minorities, because let me tell you, when you see his responses to these poets, you will find one common element. He has celebrated and responded and paid tribute to only those poets who lived as exile, whether it is Mandelstam or whether it is Akhmatova. Akhmatova, of course, did not leave Russia, or whether it is Mahmud Darwish, because Parsis also migrated from Persia to avoid, Islamic persecution. So therefore, maybe that is why he feels a sense of, identity and oneness with them. So Jhala Sahab, I know time is ticking. So, because we have talked about one Asian poet, therefore one more Asian poet, and then I will talk about one painting. That's it. Okay. This is of course Faiz Ahmad Faiz, because it is often said that Daruwalla is very good at form. He has written a ghazal called Pakistani Ghazal. Of course, it doesn't follow the Radif Kafiya pattern. I have written ghazals in English, sorry to say, but then it is self-advertisement. So I know how rigorous it is. I can read out a ghazal or two later. Anyways, so towards the end of this collection, he has translated Faiz. And I do not know why he translated Faiz and why only 4 katas. Katas are 4-line poems. Kitas or katas, both are equally correct. And I was talking about exile, I was talking about political repression. So Faiz also was implicated in Rawalpindi case, if you remember, when Akbar Khan probably was plotting against Liaquat Ali's government, and he was found to be a party involved in the failed coup attempt, and therefore he was lodged in jail, in Sargodha jail and in Layalpur jail. And because he was a dissenting voice, all these voices are dissenting voices, by the way. Because he was a dissenting voice, therefore he was not allowed to keep paper and pen in his cell. And therefore, this katha is very famous. I will read the original Urdu and then for your understanding English translation. It goes like this: Mata hai law ho kalam, chin gayi to kya gam hai. Mata is of course the wealth of paper and pen. It actually means property, mata. Here maybe wealth. मता लौह ओ कलम छिन गई तो क्या गम है कि खून दिल में डुबो ली हैं उंगलियां मैंने. I have dipped my fingers in the ink of blood. ज़बां पे मोहर लगी है तो क्या की रख दी है हर एक हल्का जंजीर में जबा मैंने. So he's saying I am fettered, but each ring of my fetters, they have got a tongue to speak on my behalf. And Daruwalla has translated it. What if quill and tablet have been impounded? I have dipped my fingers in my heart's blood and pain. What if the tongue is sealed? I have kept a tongue in each link of my iron chains. And then he has translated a ghazal which goes like this. Very interesting. Go sabko baham sagar o bada to nahi tha. Ye shahar udas itna zyada to nahi tha. So he is talking about, a repressive regime, and he's saying that it's not that earlier people were having a lot of fun, they were drinking and enjoying their lives, but then our country was not that bad. Go baham sabko sagar o bada to nahi tha, ye shahar utna udas itna zyada to nahi tha, and goes on like this. And then the second couplet, galiyon mein fira karte the do char diwane, there were only two, three people who used to, criticize the government and used to suffer because of that. Har shakhs ka sad chak labada to nahi tha. Sad chak labada, sad is 100. So there is a cloak, he's wearing, the dissenting person, the dissenter is wearing a cloak, okay, which has got 100, holes in it. So har shakhs ka sad chak labada to nahi tha. So here we stop, and then just one painting by George Crabbe, and then we will stop. Please, jara isko kar dijiye. Just this one, and then I will stop. Okay, so this is a painting, just as rebels and exiles and dissenting voices appeal to him, in the same way, those who do not do figurative representational paintings, they naturally, appeal to him. So here you have To Georges Braque. This is the poem To Georges Braque. And Georges Braque, for those of you who do not know, he was a Cubist painter who collaborated with Picasso. But there is nothing Cubist in this painting. This painting is part of what he calls School Prints series. Now, School Prints series was a scheme which was launched or introduced by a pilot called Derek Ronsley, okay, and he died in the war, and this project was then taken up by his wife Brenda. Now, what was this project all about? The part of the project was to procure paintings from contemporary painters, Picasso, Braque, or Matisse. Okay, three names come automatically. So these painters were supposed to do basic paintings on thin paper. This is a lithograph. Okay, and this lithograph was done in 1946. So they were supposed to paint simple paintings so that once you paste them on the school walls, even when the children are learning the multiplication table or doing the drill with spellings, they can see the paintings, and then of course they can unconsciously imbibe, the craft. That was basically. Now this is called bird, fish, and star. Okay. So how many things he is doing? He is saying that you do not need to paint sky as sky, because sky is remote. Okay. So your sky should not be ethereal or ether-like. Your sky should be very tangible, very solid, very tactile. And he says that sea and sky, because fish you find in an ocean, and birds you find in sky or star for that matter. So he says that you can, if you are imaginative, you can blend the two spaces. Because he says that ultramarine, this word itself means beyond sea. So beyond sea, you have sky, and both of them can merge, can blend, on the painting space. And he says that for painting a star, you don't have to paint a quasar, that is a burnt out, star. A star which you make by overlapping two triangles, 6-pointed stars, okay, that is called David, Star of David. This is okay, okay. And he says that for the eyes of the bird, just a dot is enough. And he says that if the claws look like a tripod, or if legs look like stilts, you should not bother. What he's saying is that that a painting does not aspire towards photographic realism. Okay. So and he says that you don't have, when you are painting a bird, you should not bother too much about the feather and the down. And he says that it's okay if you if you don't care about the laws of perspective. Perspective is that, how you show depth and height and other things. So he says that when a real bird flies, she follows the laws of physics. But painting has its own laws. Okay. So it's a wonderful poem. Can I read, sir? That's the last one. Huh? No. The sky need not be at the top. So sky need not be at the top. It can be at the bottom, or it can be one. It could be a blue backdrop, rough in texture, something you could feel. Stronger than ether or the ethereal. That means you cannot feel ether, but you can feel the sky. Okay, it's right in front of you. Then paint a star. Don't go back very far. Now this is Keki Daruwalla's rhyming. Very difficult. Don't go very far to a dead quasar. Who wants some burnt out hell? David's star will do as well. When you paint a bird, we remember it is older than words, younger only to air or water or meteor fires. So when you are painting a bird, because birds predated human civilization, therefore you should try to capture that essence, not the realistic bird, naturalistic bird. Don't potter around too much with wings or down. What if it has stilts for legs or a tripod for claws? Paint and flight have different laws. When all that rigidity explodes through the window of the painting into the sky, imagine how the bird will fly. Reach for hope and your periscope and draw your fish. Let the line waver, dot the eye and discover the blue of sky. Turning blue of sea. In any case, ultramarine, a seaweed word, came from the sea. The sea and sky on one square board, star and fish and static bird. Rest your brush and eyes and oars. So when I read this one, I thought, why oars? Oars, because when you are trying to control everything, that's why he's saying rest your oars also. Okay. Rest your brush and eyes and oars. Kites and fancies, let them soar. Perspective is not worth a kopeck, worth a chalana. That window blue with light, make opaque, and on the plaque, sign dark. Thank you so much.
Okay. So first thing is you'll curse me for curtailing this particular presentation or a talk. No need to use, say, adjectives like it was a well-researched or I doubt, I'll mar whatever you gathered or whatever you have captured. But making it so simple, particularly Nawal Kishorji, he said that I'm addressing the students. I'm sure classification and very simplistically, sounding simplistically, when he classified the 50 years of range of poems so comprehensively, I think it was worth it, and particularly the application part where it comes to go intertextual and the poems on poets and paintings. So I'm sure that all of you must have been mesmerized, and there's no doubt, not just students, but we too are really, the word grateful also is not a word, that you could prepare for this seminar, you could really foreground something that very naturally does not come to us, or we do not go to it when we have limitations of syllabus, and even the students have their own limitations. Thank you, Sharma ji. For 10 minutes, I know it's lunch time, but we have celebrated this poetry day today, I suppose, with this session. So a couple of questions, if any. Questions or your response, or could be.
There is something that it's not a question exactly, but what you are talking about, the guilt that yeah, is what I was telling earlier also, that Mahapatra's autobiography is in Odia. Okay, and he has written most of his other works in English, but the autobiography is in Odia, and it is brilliant. I mean, people who really love his, who are like little bit aversive of his writing in English, have also said that his autobiography is brilliant. So I think he tries to minimize the so-called damage that he would have felt of not writing in the autobiography.
In fact, these poets, Keki, Daruwalla, it's okay, I think I'm audible? Yes. These poets, Keki, Daruwalla ji and Nisin Ezekiel, Jayant Mahapatra ji, A.K. Ramanujan, I'm talking about the first generation poets, Kamala Das, they are all bilingual and they do not feel shy while writing in their own language. Arun Kolatkar did not get Sahitya Academy for his English poetry. He got it for Marathi Kavita. And Dilip Chitre also. So these poets like A.K. Ramanujan, Dilip Chitre, even a poet like Vikram Seth, recently he translated Hanuman Chalisa. I referred to this text when I was invited at Rice Park. In one verse he has made a big mistake also. I think if they don't write in English, I mean in their mother tongue, they translate a lot. So if you look at his first collection of poems, Mappings, he has translated Faiz. He has alluded to Nirala. Daruwalla has translated that famous Katha where you Raat Koi Hui Teri Yaad Aayi. This has been translated by both Daruwalla, Khushwant Singh and Vikram Singh. So maybe that was one way of assuaging that keen sense of guilt that gnawed at their hearts.
Redemption.
Yeah. But thank you very much for this input. Now I want to say something, if you allow me. For the students, This is the recent book published by Sahitya Academy. This is priced $250 only. And this time I did a mad thing. I went to book fair all the way from Bhuj to Delhi for one day. Did not stay anywhere, came back. Okay. For the first time I flew. I'm a poor man, I don't like, but I flew for the sake of books. Okay. Now what I'm trying to say is that this is a book which contains some good essays on Daruwalla. Harish Trivedi sir,
who could not come because of his ill health, has also contributed one article about his reminiscences.
He was to speak on Daruwalla.
Yeah, that's right. And that is why I had a sense of trepidation when you told me that day that. So I had already decided that I will speak on Daruwalla. So I thought, ठीक है चलो, let me be audacious. I will speak on Daruwalla. So why I am showing this book? Because in this book somebody has, Usha Akela is the editor. She has done something, I think, which one should do as a lover of poetry. I'm saying, not only which I tell my students to do. Whenever you read a poem, pick up good images and make a collection of those good images, reference them. So what she has done is, she has given a list of images and also aphorisms, because Daruwalla's poetry is highly aphoristic. So just to quote one example, rivers are like daughters. After a while they set out on their own. Now this is epigrammatic. One more example, a poem rises like yeast and keeps rising, moving, mutating when the language is dark with dream. So this is something which you do not find in the books written by so-called critics of Keki and Daruwalla. There are dime a dozen. So, but then this is a very good book, and Sahitya Academy has not given me anything to advertise this book. But then this is the best part. And of course, Harish Trivedi's.
Sahitya Academy is not generally available. That's the problem. So
This book is not available on Amazon.
it's not available.
I purchased from Book Fair long before this, little knowing that I will be using this book for this talk. So this is one, and one last thing. So far as his use of, because I could not touch upon this aspect. His images are very good. And you will find so many of them scattered through his, because normally we associate imagistic poetry with short words, thanks to his account, petals on a bit like power, like a taxi-tropic making, when the evening is spread out like this. Now, I found there's a poem called District Law Courts. In this poem, towards the end, he has used a brilliant image. Because I write a bit of poetry, so I felt really jealous. Really jealous. And Billy Collins, in one of the programs, at White House, he said that there is nothing called poetic voice. Any poet who excites your jealousy is your voice. So maybe here Daruwalla was my voice. So okay. So a lizard probes the nostrils of a leaning carbine, a gun. And yet the carbine does not sneeze. A ceiling fan creaks around its arthritic bolts. Black jacketed lawyers and a black robed judge munch away at the body of law. Brilliant. So, I mean, if this sadly is not there in Usha Akela's collection. So I am also thinking of making my. This is parasitic work, of course. But I want to, do this parasitic work.
I think things are sinking in. It will take some time. What you all have come to know now is often we keep on telling. You have to read through a lot of texts in order to digest and then come up here and speak without what Professor Singh used to do, without even a shard of paper, without even a single point written anywhere. All of us have seen him. Nawal Kishor has worked for his PhD under him. Mehta sir has worked for his PhD. I have worked for my PhD under him. Dhala sir has known him so well. That tradition, Mehta sir was talking about this hall and that tradition. A lot of echoes here. It will take some time to sink in. But you see the brilliance. I mean, so much of reading that has gone in and internalizing to come up with a talk like this.
And I am very thankful to Swaraj University English Department. You know why I was telling this to one of my, not exaggerating one minute. The day you phoned me, I thought I have got an opportunity to renew my love affair with Daruwalla ji. So some of these books were lying in my office cupboard, some of these books were lying in those cardboard boxes which I have shown. So I unearthed them all. And then I thought, let me.
Like a poem, a talk also rises like peace. Out of the box.
Only this poem, this poetry book, I don't have in the original. This is spiral bound copy. But it is very much available. I am looking for his individual collection of poems, like winter poems, apparitions and everything. Only map maker is available online. This book is not available.
Although recent. Although the Sahitya Academy book is recent.
Yeah, recent. The most recent. In fact, I think this got published when he was in the intensive care unit. So they have uploaded a YouTube program also, which is part of that program, wherein the Daruwalla is very counseling and then Malashi Bhavan, Sukuta Paul Kumar. They are all Ranjit Hoskote. Talking about this book. So I thought that let me just share this with the students.
The end is taking note of what must have gone into deliberating on particular engagement, the poets, and the foreground that the speaker has shown. Keki Daruwalla at one place states that in case of Indian English poets, is that all Indian English poetry is written in exile internally. And so this is Keki Daruwalla giving that's very good of it. So that's one insight that he brings in order to think of Indian English poetry as a whole in exile. Of course, expatriates who are writing from abroad. We have a few poets in our syllabus also. But even those who are writing from here, like visiting to, it can be considered as poetry in exile internally, because this is a vast, as good as a subcontinent, with all the cultural variety that we have to respect these points. So thank you all, particularly the speaker, language speaker today, and all of you.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful words. The next session will begin at 2:30. So now I humbly request everyone to proceed toward guest house for the lunch. At 2:30.
Yes, sir.
Yes, we have recorded.
Yes, sir.